Welcome to the Grassroots Army podcast. This platform is for common sense people looking for up-to-date, accurate, and truthful information without the hot garbage corporate media bias. The power of one can lead to the power of many. You never know what small act that you may say or do that may literally change the lives of millions tomorrow. And don't you ever think that you can't make a difference, because you can. Good morning, my fellow Michiganders. Good morning, my fellow Americans. Welcome to the Grassroots Army podcast. I'm, of course, your host, Garrett Soldano. And this morning, I have a special treat for all of you. Miss Christina from Radix Verum is producing a documentary with the Whitmer kidnapping plot with the FBI. So what I'm going to do right now is show you a trailer of her documentary. And this young lady's going to come on and tell us all about how she got involved. She has an amazing story. So I hope you enjoy this interview as much as I give it. So here we go.
And we go now to new developments in the plot to kidnap and kill Governor Gretchen Whitmer.
13 suspects arrested, including 7 alleged members of a right-wing militia group
who are preparing to kidnap and possibly kill me.
The defense claims the FBI, through undercover agents and informants, were behind the plan, and that Fox and Croft were duped into going along with it.
What the FBI did is unconscionable.
It's almost like they had their evidence, had their facts, and created the crime.
Let's get a plan together to attack our governors all at the same time.
We can cloud the water. We can send everybody into disarray and chaos.
He's the perfect chameleon. He knew exactly what to say, how to say it.
Dan Chappell was the driving force of it all.
He was there to lead. He was there to orchestrate.
I think he viewed us as an opportunity.
Everything here is a lie or a manipulation.
It's almost impossible to fathom how brazen, how bold, and how dangerous these individuals were.
Thank you to the fearless FBI agents.
Inside, the takedown of the FBI agent who led one of the nation's biggest domestic terror investigations.
If you can think of a synonym for patriots, think of terrorists.
You're seeing the exact same methodology being used without difference.
Everything about this case was a terrorism attack, I agree, by the FBI.
Unlimited power, unlimited money.
My biggest fear is being, called a terrorist from the nation that I love.
Your entire life could be taken away from you for something you didn't do.
What they've done is destroying lives.
And I will not stop until he's free or I die.
Wow. Holy cow. I cannot wait for this interview. Without further ado, here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Miss Christina from Radix Verum on X. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you especially for all of us here in the state of Michigan who have suffered underneath this tyrannical governor and her rule over the past several years. It's when you watch that video and you kind of relive some of that stuff, it doesn't give you a nice, warm, fuzzy feeling in your belly. That's for sure, Christina. So welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And yes, I agree.
Yeah. And just like that smile, that smirk that she gives at that interview, it's like a knife in my eyeball.
She can't help herself. It's the narcissism. She was like loving that moment, the attention she was getting. It just completely contradicts what was actually being said. Like the way that she was physically responding to that event tells you everything you need to know, especially if you know anything about narcissism. You can get an idea of the kind of person Gretchen Whitmer is.
Yeah, and for those of us who lived underneath her rule, especially during the unconstitutional lockdowns and the mandates and everything else that she hammered down with, we know that all too familiar. So I got to ask, like, how did you ever even get involved with this? Because you said you live in Virginia, correct?
Yes.
So
right outside the swamp in Northern Virginia.
Well, if you're going to produce something like this, I would think that you'd have to be in the trenches, right? You'd have to be in the trenches to produce a documentary like this. And just before we begin, I want to let everyone know that Christina is still fundraising to finish this documentary. And I included the link in the description, www.knkfilm.com. Go there, check it out, buy her a cup of coffee, as we say, donate whatever you can so we can get this much important documentary done. So how'd you get involved with this?
Well, I am an independent journalist. Prior to that, I was a paralegal, so I kind of have an investigatory mind, I guess, and I'm also very skeptical as a person. And so when this happened and that she did that press conference, the news of the arrest went out. As you remember, this was back in October of 2020. So it's a month before the 2020 election. The news of the arrest was used as a talking point for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. They were saying that these guys were like ISIS and that they were radicalized by Trump because he tweeted out, "Liberate Michigan." So from the beginning, I knew that the official story was not the case, was going to be BS. And also at the time, I'd been reporting on other elements of FBI corruption, past FBI operations like PatCon, which was like a COINTELPRO, but aimed at the right. This was in the 90s. And it stands for Patriot Conspiracy. It was an operation geared towards kind of like Christian right-wing militia types. There was the Christian identity movement at that time. And so the FBI had kind of penetrated and was trying to disrupt these groups in the same way they did to the New Left in the 60s and 70s in COINTELPRO. So moving forward, though, to the modern aspect of PatCon, we have organizations like the Order of Nine Angles that are satanic, neo-Nazi groups that have kind of been allowed to proliferate. And the guy that was running the American chapter of that group turned out to be a longtime FBI informant for 20 years. And the FBI was paying for him to publish these very disturbing satanic propaganda books. And so my research into that, when this happened, because I was covering that in 2019 to 2020, I knew immediately like the FBI's fingerprints are going to be all over this. And that press conference she did was disturbing. So I was writing articles about it. I was covering the, court filings and what was coming out, and very soon into that process, because these guys took it to trial to their credit, which a lot of people, when the feds are coming down on you and you're looking at probably life in prison, a lot of people fold, they take plea deals. So we never get the full discovery process. And a lot of information can be concealed that way. And I think they're kind of used to that. I think they thought that's what was going to happen here, but these guys fought it, or most of them did. And so as that process played out, we learned that the FBI had a network of 12 informants, 2 undercover agents. And as it went through trial, I was just reporting on it, listening in every day on the public access line, writing articles for my little Substack. And when that first trial ended with Dan Harris and Brandon Caserta being acquitted in a mistrial on Adam and Barry, I reached out to Brandon to interview him for my channel. And I realized just in that interview and the conversations that we were having that there was so much more about this story that you wouldn't have known just listening into the trial, just reading the court documents. There's a lot that didn't make it in there. So, I had no filmmaking experience at that point. And I said, well, we have to make this a documentary. And so that began my journey, which has been years now of traveling across the country to interview these people, to get their stories. And it's been quite the journey. So just to give some background of this, there was 4 trials total for people who may, and I'm sure most of your audience is familiar, but people who may not understand what the actual charges were. You had 14 guys arrested. And they were not all from Michigan. You had a guy from Wisconsin. You had Barry Croft, one of the ringleaders who lived in Delaware. So this was, first of all, bigger than Michigan. 4 trials total. So they broke the charges into 6 men charged at the federal level for conspiracy to kidnap. Now, they also added a superseding indictment and included charges of WMDs for some of these guys, which is outrageous. Then 8 other guys were charged at the state level for providing material support, felony firearm, and gang affiliation, which is absolutely outrageous. So in total, we had 4 trials. There was the first federal trial, which, again, 2 men were acquitted. There was a mistrial on Adam and Barry, the guys framed as ringleaders. They retried them in a hasty retrial to kind of get the outcome that they wanted. They were ultimately convicted in that retrial. Then there was a state trial in Jackson County for Joe Morrison, Paul Beller, and Pete Musico. And then the final state trial in Antrim County with Eric Molitor, Bill and Michael Null, and there were two other gentlemen who took plea deals, Sean Fix and Brian Higgins, but they did not testify against other people. So it seems that around that time, they were just trying to wrap this thing up. And that trial at the Antrim County, all of those men were acquitted. So we have 5 acquittals and 5 convictions and 4 trials total. And so after the retrial of Adam and Barry, so I traveled to Michigan so I could be there on the ground when the verdict came in. Obviously, I thought they were going to be acquitted because Brandon and Daniel had been acquitted and they had that mistrial. So I thought they were very close to acquitting these men. And when I got back home, I realized they're going to be sentenced very soon, and then they're going to be shipped off to their final destination. Somebody needs to get their story. So I started interviewing them for my documentary while they were at Newaygo County, and that got very interesting very quickly. I asked Barry if he wanted me to put out a statement prior to his sentencing. I put it out the night before, and the next day, the prosecutor, Nils Kessler's quoting from the statement that I put out. And that was crazy. They gave Barry 19 and a half years after saying Adam was the ringleader, mostly. But then at sentencing, they said, well, Barry was the spiritual leader. And I never heard them say that before. They said he was like the blind sheik. And I was like, what? It was so bizarre. And then they said because he was talking to me, that was evidence that he was unrepentant and completely radicalized because he wasn't taking responsibility for what the FBI did. And so I knew quickly that after their sentencing, they were probably going to be moved within a week or two. That's typically how long it takes. You're sentenced, you're not immediately processed out. It takes some time. Well, the night of their sentencing, after their sentencing, I asked them, hey, Jim Jordan has this weaponization committee. Do you guys want to give statements to the committee? And I will do my best to get the statements to them, urging them to investigate your case. They said, yes, obviously. So Adam had written a statement and Barry wrote one. I had Barry read it on video. We recorded it. I put out that statement. A colleague of mine, another journalist, Ken Silva from Headline USA, wrote an article about it. Well, the next day, Adam and Barry were moved to supermax prisons across the country, and my house was swatted all at the same time. So Adam was sent to Florence Supermax. Barry was sent to Terre Haute. They were saying they were going to put him in the communications management unit, which is outrageous. And it has been a journey. I have been debanked. I've had a lot of weird things happen. But, the fight continues.
When were you debanked?
I want to say in May of 2024. And I don't remember what preceded that, but yes, I was debanked, and it was quite obviously due to the documentary.
I'm sorry you were swatted. That is a horrible experience, very dangerous. Did they ever find out who did it?
No, and while it was happening, they were saying to me, oh, I hope it's not the FBI swatting you, but we'll never be able to know because whoever did it used this voice to text thing and we'll just never be able to find who did it. And I'm like, this is happening now, though. Like, why are you here then? Like, if you know that it was just a very bizarre thing. And then it happened again later at 4:00 in the morning.
Unbelievable. Very sorry that happened to you. So going into your documentary, what did you find that was the most shocking? I guess, how long were these informants and the 2 undercover agents involved with these people?
Well, first of all, I have found a lot of stuff. So for people who maybe don't know, this was going to be a multi-state plot. They wanted it to be a multi-state plot. And they had people across, I want to say 14 states that were being targeted in this case. There's a lot of egregious things that occurred. A lot of it never made it into the record. You have around 20 unindicted co-conspirators who were all essentially threatened. Like, there were people who had their homes raided, that had their electronics and firearms seized, but they were never charged with anything. And then they were told that if they testified on behalf of these men, they were going to go to jail for 10 years at least. And when they wanted to testify, they brought them in outside the presence of the jury and one by one threatened them on the stand. This is witness intimidation. They were told that you are under investigation, and that if you say anything that incriminates yourself, you could be arrested leaving the courtroom today. I'm sorry, that is highly illegal. The fact that this continued, that the judge allowed that to happen, I think is outrageous. But this is what occurred. So to answer your question, what we found contradicts the official narrative of the informants and how they got involved in this. We still don't know the identities of all the informants, which I think is really important to understand. We know maybe half of them. And then there are some that I think I know. I'm about 90% sure I know who they are, but not 100%. So I don't want to say anything about that. However, the cover story, there's two main informants. You got a guy from Flint, Michigan, Dan Chappell. Dan is an Iraq war veteran. And then you have a gentleman named Steve Robeson. Robeson is from Wisconsin, and he has a history of being an informant. He was in biker gangs back in the 80s. He informed on the police. He informed on some farmer who was going to do some weird, like, wanted to kill his wife or something. So he has a history of informing. He's a felon. He is a child sex offender. He literally impregnated a teenager. This is who the FBI uses as their informants. And he's really the key architect is Robeson. And I think that should be clear to people who may not know that, because they tried to conceal his role in this whole thing and focus more on Dan Chappell, who was their more presentable, credible informant. So they say in Robeson's CHS file, they claim that he becomes an informant in October of 2019 because he heard vague chatter amongst 3%er groups of threats to law enforcement, and that he did not like this. And so he comes, he goes to his local police, and then he somehow, gets in contact with the FBI, becomes an informant. Well, that's not true. We now know from the documents that Steve Robeson was online. He was on Facebook. He was posting pictures of himself holding a gun. He's a felon, not allowed to do that. But he was also calling politicians tyrants. He was talking about the Boogaloo and other key words that were flagged under something called Operation Bronze Griffin. So he got pulled in Bronze Griffin. Bronze Griffin was a program that was run by big tech companies where they're flagging keywords and giving that information to law enforcement without law enforcement even needing a warrant. It's a voluntary thing that these big tech companies were doing, and this was putting people into a database. And so he becomes an informant because he gets flagged in this thing for things he's saying online.
And what year is this, Christina? All this is happening in what year?
This is October of 2019.
Okay. Before the pandemic.
Oh, okay. Yes. This is before that. And he's saying these things online. And it's very, very interesting. So in January of 2020, he makes contact with Barry Croft online. Barry is the gentleman, the middle-aged trucker from Delaware, father of 3, not from Michigan. And he befriends Barry by saying he knew a friend of Barry's who had passed away under suspicious circumstances. And then another informant, a female informant from Tennessee, Jenny Plunk, she also makes contact with him at this time. And so this is before the actual investigation into the Wolverine Watchmen in Michigan begins. This is early 2020, January of 2020. Now, the Wolverine Watchmen are a group from Jackson County, Michigan. It's founded by Joe Morrison and his father-in-law, Pete Musico. And really, it was a Facebook page. The page was created in November of 2019. So this was 1 month after Robeson in Wisconsin becomes an informant. Joe Morrison creates this Facebook page. I want to say it's like November 25th of 2019. So by March of 2020, the FBI has already penetrated this group. It was kind of like a prepping group. It was not really a militia group. in any real sense. It's a group of guys who live out in the country, and they wanted to teach each other whatever skills they had, talk about prepping stuff. They're literally just getting drunk and shooting in the backyard. That's what it is.
So what we do in Michigan.
Exactly. They're being country boys, okay? Yeah. And so this is March of 2020. Dan Chappell claims his cover story, very similar to Robeson's, is that he was looking to maintain his Pro 2A, his 2A tactical skills or whatever. And mind you, this is an Iraq War veteran. This is somebody who was a firearms instructor. He's claiming he's looking on Facebook for Pro 2A groups because he wants to maintain his perishable tactical training skills. And he claims that the Facebook algorithm recommended this Wolverine Watchmen page. Right off the bat, we know that's a lie. This was a private Facebook page that at that time had maybe 15 members. So it's kind of silly that if you're looking for Pro 2A groups, there are groups that have thousands of people in it that are, you know, more legitimate, I guess, than these guys out in the country who are shooting in the backyard. So he joins the group, and within 1 week, he becomes an informant. And I want to point out, this was, I think, March 17th of 2020. He becomes an informant is 1 week before Whitmer announces her lockdowns. And I don't think that's coincidental. So Dan Chappell joins this kind of loose group of guys who are shooting and drinking in the backyard. And he is the one who says that they should, you know, do real tactical training. And he steers them into being more of like a militia group and a structured with a hierarchy. This is all the FBI's idea. And so throughout the course of 2020, from March all the way through August, the FBI, via this network of informants, puts on meetings, field training exercises, which is common for militia groups to engage in. And then they're recording these people basically just saying very incendiary things. But people need to remember also what was happening at the time. So in 2020, we had Antifa rioting, we had BLM rioting. In May, we had George Floyd, and things got really bad around that time. And I think that because it's been so many years, people forget how scary some of that stuff was, how dangerous it was, and how concerning that law enforcement was standing down and letting these people just burn entire cities to the ground, loot stores, that pull people out of their cars and, you know, assault them. And they did nothing.
And not to mention what they were doing with the unconstitutional lockdowns here in the state of Michigan. She was telling us what we could and couldn't buy. We weren't allowed to leave our house. And a lot of people, I mean, you could probably take 40 to 50% of Michiganders at that time who probably didn't say a lot of nice things that probably could have been arrested by the FBI. This guy
exactly
included, right? Okay.
Right. So this is, you know, it's March. He joins the group. He kind of, you know, tells them we need to structure this more. Mind you, Joe Morrison, these are working class guys. Like, they're chimney sweeps, you know, they're not, they don't have a lot of means. These are very modest people of very modest means. And so, you know, Dan Chappell kind of takes over the Wolverine Watchmen. And this is, we go from March to April. There are 2 rallies that happen in April. They're anti-lockdown kind of Pro 2A rallies. One is April 15, 2020. I'm sure you remember this. I believe that one was Operation Gridlock. Yep. So the FBI, you know, they have the Wolverine Watchmen attend this rally. The FBI is monitoring this. There's another rally April 30th of 2020. And this one is particularly interesting. Dan Chappell takes a group of about 10 of the Wolverine Watchmen to this rally. They're in full kits, right? So they've got on their plate carriers, they're carrying their ARs. Some of them are wearing face masks because it was also COVID. Yep. And, you know, the narrative about this, when this happened, was that there were these right-wing white supremacists storming the Capitol at Lansing. And this is not at all what actually happened. These men stood in line for like an hour. They went through COVID screening. They were legally allowed to carry it in the Capitol at that time. The laws changed afterwards because of this. but they were not breaking the law by simply going into the building in their kits and gear, and they were just protesting peacefully. They didn't attack anybody. There's a picture that is famous of them lined up, you know, along the wall there with their gear on and their masks, and Paul has his hair in a mohawk. And so they look kind of scary. And these pictures went out all over the media. And then the FBI used that to recruit more people into the Wolverine Watchmen, just give them attention, you know. And so anyways, what I think is hilarious about this is that the FBI had set up a mobile command unit. So they're monitoring this in real time. They've got drones flying overhead at 7,000 feet. They have, you know, 30 agents like in the area, and they're listening in on a live wire. Dan Chappell's wearing a live wire. And at one point he says, I think these guys are getting ready to do something. So Special Agent Impala calls the Lansing Capitol Police and tells them to stand down, open the doors, let everybody in. And that's how everybody got in the first place. Now, in their own documents, they say they believe Pete Musico had a live grenade on him at the time. So what are you doing? You know, like you say let them in then, but you think that they're dangerous and scary and have grenades and are about to take, you know.
Yeah, let the guy with the grenade in the building. That's makes common sense.
This is the FBI, and this is like the ham-fisted nature of this entire thing that you discover throughout this. And so just to clarify, he did not have a live grenade. It was a hollowed out. It's like you can get this stuff at military surplus stores. It just looks cool. And so there was never really danger. Okay, but they thought there was. They believed it because this is also how little of a real investigation they're doing into people. They don't have to have an actual predicate like real law enforcement does. Like if the police wants to investigate you, there has to be real probable cause. For the FBI, they don't require that. They can receive an anonymous tip and they will open what they call an intelligence threat assessment on you, which means that they can manufacture a reason to investigate anybody. That's
what they did to me. Like somebody
really? Oh, that's so funny.
A radical right-wing extremist in the FBI showed up to my door.
Yeah, so you get it. You understand that the FBI they're not held to the same standards as local law enforcement. And in a lot of times, they're just taking credit for things that local law enforcement is doing. You know, they'll come in and take credit for busts and arrests that they had nothing to do with. It's sad. And so this is, you know, as we're moving forward, that is April 30th of 2020 is that big event where they claimed that they were storming the Capitol, which didn't happen. And after that, in May, we get George Floyd, and then we have riots. And there were riots in Michigan and Grand Rapids and Detroit. You know, there was a lot of things that were happening that was concerning to these guys. So that was part of the reason that they were so interested in training and having meetings, because they're like, hey, if this comes to our doorstep, the police we've already seen are going to do nothing. Yep. We need to be able to defend our families, our homes, our communities. These are the guys who would have stood between you and a mob of people with Molotov cocktails and black bloc, trying to destroy your town and burn it to the ground. And that was something I think the FBI in particular didn't like, because it appears from what I've seen, the FBI was trying to foment political violence in the lead up to the 2020 election. And in fact, one of the agents, undercover agents who worked the Whitmer case, also infiltrated the Denver Black Lives Matter movement and tried to get a BLM activist to do a plot to assassinate the Attorney General of Colorado. So they're on both sides of this thing. And I think people forget too, there was an FBI presence when Kyle Rittenhouse happened. The FBI had drones flying overhead, and then they tried to conceal the evidence of that video that showed what actually happened, which I find particularly disturbing, but it's all disturbing. And so May, at that point, Dan Chappell has pretty much consolidated control of the Wolverine Watchmen. He's basically seen as the leader. He is the executive officer or second in command to Joe Morrison, who is the so-called commander of the Wolverine Watchmen. But Joe Morrison's not even attending most of these meetings. he's not at most of these FTXs. He's working 6 days a week. He's having marital problems. He's a young father of working class means. He doesn't have the money to do all these things. And nobody really saw him as the leader. You know, he had the title, but Dan Chappell was seen as the leader. And, you know, part of what the FBI told Dan was to talk up his war story. So he was telling these guys that he was part of an elite team that rescued American sniper Chris Kyle in Sauder City. He's telling them the stories of being, you know, a forward observer, and he's showing them videos of him kicking down doors, like being a shit kicker for the military. So these guys are like super impressed by Dan because none of them.
True stories?
No, he did not rescue Chris Kyle, but he was a forward observer. He was in Iraq, and the videos were real that he was showing of him kicking in doors. That is true. And so, but the point was to kind of play up he's a war hero. You know, he also had this weird hernia that was sticking out through his stomach, and he would complain about the VA, and he would get these guys really upset that, like, you know, they won't give me my surgery. And he was showing them this weird medical issue he had. And so, you know, these guys think that this guy's like a hero. To them, none of them have the skills Dan Chappell has. So this idea that he joined this group to maintain his perishable tactical training skills is a joke, because how are people who are less trained than you, how are they going to help you maintain your skills? It's nonsense. And, you know, Dan had said that he saw threats of violence against law enforcement in their encrypted group chat, which you would go through the Facebook page. They had some vetting questions, and it would direct you to like a group on Wired, I think it was, the encrypted chat app. And this was also, it wasn't to evade law enforcement. It's because people forget this too. Everybody was being censored online. If you questioned the lockdowns or the vaccines, or you talked about, you know, the BLM riots, you would lose your Facebook account. And so that's what they were trying to avoid. That's why they were directing people to these encrypted chats. It's because that's where they could talk without being banned and censored. It had nothing to do with like, oh, we're going to conceal what we're doing from law enforcement. That's ridiculous. So he gets into this chat. He says that they were talking about wanting to do reverse red flags on law enforcement. So trying to find addresses of police officers to do a reverse red flag. Like, what does that even mean? Red flag law is when somebody has some kind of alleged mental problem and they come in and disarm them. So they were going to try to disarm police. Like, what does this mean? The allegation, though, was that they were going to harm law enforcement at their homes. Well, he never documented these alleged threats against law enforcement in this chat, just like Steve Robeson had no evidence to corroborate the vague chatter he claims he heard amongst 3%ers of threats to law enforcement. So these are unsubstantiated cover stories for how these people really became informants. Now, for Steve Robeson, I think he obviously had taken a picture of himself holding a gun as a felon. He's not supposed to do it. I think he was doing it to save himself, but I also think he has this history of informing. He's probably always been an informant. Dan Chappell is different. I believe Dan Chappell wanted to be an FBI agent. And we have text messages where he's talking to Jason Chambers, one of the handling agents, and he says he's building his resume. Acting as an informant in this case, building his resume. Okay. So these are the questionable things happening. It's May. Let's move forward to June of 2020. This is where it gets really interesting. I think the FBI knew at this point that, number one, they knew they wanted to wrap this up before the election. Jason Chambers wanted to have a big case because he was going to be leaving the FBI and transitioning to the private sector. And he was talking about, wanting to essentially have this big case to launch his private intelligence company. It was called Exa Intel. Exa Intel was selling event monitoring to state capitals. You couldn't make this up if you wanted to. So how funny that they have a storming of the Capitol in April of 2020 as Jason Chambers is trying to sell his venue monitoring to these, and he's talking to like Louisiana. We've got an email there for as far back as 2019 of him trying to sell this proprietary, cyber software. And so there's various like reasons for why this happened. Jason Chambers also is in text messages to another FBI employee saying he was going to run this case as a TEI, whether he got approval or not. TEI stands for Terrorism Enterprise Investigation. This is the highest threat level. It enables, number one, you have to get signed off on it by the special agent in charge. So there has to be approvals, and it gives them the ability to use kind of all of the resources of the FBI. And the things like the aerial surveillance by plane, by drone, to spend millions of dollars. And really, like I said, they had people in so many different states. That's multiple field offices having to be coordinated at a higher level. So it's very interesting how this happens. June 6th of 2020, Steve Robeson, the FBI informant who is a pedo, calls and chairs a national militia meeting at the Drury Inn in Suites in Columbus, Ohio. Now, the government claimed that Barry Croft put on this meeting. Barry from Delaware. This is not true. This was called and chaired by Robeson, and it was paid for by Robeson, which is why they never produced the receipt for who paid for the hotel conference room. Yeah, newsflash, it was the feds. And so at this event, there's 3 informants, Robeson and 2 others. They're all recording everything, and everybody else that is invited is a target. So there's 14 people that attend in total. So that gives you an idea of they had targets in different states, because the whole purpose of this meeting in Columbus, Ohio was the national meeting, national militia meeting, again, put on by the FBI to bring people from different states together. This gives the FBI their justification for why they're even involved in this. Oh, because it's across state lines. And so at this meeting that was informants and then targets of the FBI, Steve Robeson is telling people that, he's getting them riled up. First, he gets them incredibly stoned. He has like an ounce of marijuana. They're all smoking, and and they're out in the parking lot. They're talking about the riots. This is, remember, 1 month after George Floyd. So the riots are in full swing across the country, and people are very concerned about it. Yeah. They're very emotional. They don't know what's going to happen. There's concerns there could be some kind of civil war scenario. They think there could be a collapse of the country, and the FBI is feeding these fears, saying they're in your backyard, give them no quarter. You can't just take brick and mortar without a human, or you just locked yourself down. Like, this is the FBI saying this stuff.
That's
at
documented?
This meeting. Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I actually have, it's over there, a binder of the out-of-court statements. These were all things picked up on recording by the things the informant said that they were not allowed to introduce into trial, because the Judge Yonker, came up with this idea that anything the guys said that sounds incriminating on the recordings, of course, can be played. Anything that was incriminating said by FBI informants, he decided was hearsay. Hearsay, okay, the definition of hearsay is when, say, I'm talking to my mother-in-law, and then I come to you and I say, my mother-in-law said this. I am relaying information secondhand without the primary source there. So you just have my word that she said that. That's what we would call hearsay. It's an alleged statement given secondhand. This is not that. This is a recording of a 5-hour meeting that you're just saying anything that the government said that was bad here is hearsay. How is that hearsay? And this is how these trials were rigged. So I get incredibly angry when I see people say that they had due process, they had their day in court, they were convicted, and I'm like, no. They had their day in a kangaroo court show trial that was controlled and run by the FBI.
And that's one of our biggest concerns as American citizens, is the weaponization of our judicial process. It's like you're not going to get a fair shake anymore.
No. And I should add, too, that a lot of these judges used to be federal prosecutors. They think like a prosecutor. They are deferential to the prosecutor, to the US government, which is outrageous to me, because the way that I see it is the government has, number one, the monopoly on force. Number two, they have unlimited resources.
Yep.
And number three, there is no real oversight of what the FBI is doing. There's nobody, no civilian agency is keeping track of the programs they're running and how out of hand these things can get. So why are you giving deference to them? No, deference should be given to the defendant, who should be considered innocent until proven guilty. They should get all the deferential, preferential treatment, because there's a power disparity here. And that's not what we see happening. We see the opposite, where the government has a 99% conviction rate. There's nothing that's 99% that isn't rigged. There's no investment where you're going to get a 99% return on investment without going immediately. That is a scam. And so I really want people to understand too, that I've worked in the legal system. I know exactly how it works. And this is how corrupt it is. It is 100% there to enrich itself, to further its own existence. These people are motivated by power, prestige, money. They're all part of the same country club community. The legal community is small too. So half of these prosecutors probably hang out with the judge. Maybe they went to the same law school. Maybe there's a connection there. There's a lot that makes this very unfair from the get-go. But almost every ruling was favorable to the government in denying the defense's ability to even mount a proper legal defense. You know, in some of these, like the state guys, they were told they couldn't even utter the word entrapment. That is your legal defense. How can you not be allowed to say the word, and you can't mention these two guys were acquitted, but they're going to say, well, these two guys were convicted terrorists, and Adam and Barry convicted terrorists, but they can't mention, well, also Dan Harris and Caserta were acquitted. These aren't real trials, but I'm going off on a tangent here.
That's okay. You're obviously very informed, and I love it, because that's one thing that we don't get is detail, Christina. So thank you. We love the whole entire story. People feed off that. Go back to that meeting. So after what happened after that meeting where everybody from all the states got together?
So they brought them together. And I want to add that this is the first time Adam Fox and Barry Croft ever meet in person. They had been kind of like Facebook acquaintances, but like I said, Barry lives in Delaware, Adam is in Grand Rapids, Michigan. They never would have had the opportunity or even like a reason to come together were it not for the FBI putting on this meeting and bringing these people together and then trying to encourage them to go out and do, stupid things. So that night, Steve Robeson was trying to get a group of these guys to go into a riot that was happening in Columbus, Ohio. We need to do something about these guys. Cops aren't going to do anything. They were telling Barry they were going to be in his backyard. And Barry, he's a truck driver. He has to leave. He's got 3 young daughters. He's worried that, like, what if these people show up to my neighborhood and attack my family and I'm not there? Yeah. Like, I need to have a network of people that can, maybe come and show up, on short notice. So it starts getting these guys thinking like, we have to do something. And they're constantly pushing them that we have to have goals, we have to have objectives, or we're just going to stop having meetings. So the pressure's being put on them. And I want to make a comment here too about COVID and mental health, because this is something that doesn't get talked about enough. When you have people locked down like this, and for people who aren't in Michigan, I'm sure you could speak to this better than I could. This was not like other states where, we maybe had to wear a mask, but, it was kind of like an inconvenience, but we were allowed to go to the gym. We were allowed to go to stores. We were allowed to do normal. We could work. Nobody, was prevented from earning a living. She shut this state down. She left open liquor stores, marijuana dispensaries, but you couldn't go to work unless you were an essential worker. And so you had these guys who were stuck at home. They couldn't earn money. They have nothing to do all day except bitch about the government. And then the FBI is giving them copious amounts of marijuana and liquor and then recording them while they're just talking crap. That's what's happening. And then in the background, they're doing field training exercises. So they're doing regular militia trainings, and that is videotaped and then taken out of context to make it look like they're practicing for kidnapping a governor. And it's like, no, these are just standard, like what you have at a militia field training exercise. They have, different firearms, techniques, tactics. They had a medical tent where they were teaching people how to like tie a tourniquet or what have you. And again, in the context of the riots happening and law enforcement standing down, and you're out in the country, maybe it takes 45 minutes for an ambulance to come. You need to have these skills. And you also want to have a network of people in your area that, again, can show up if it's needed. So they're really exploiting these lockdowns and, and how people were responding to that. But a lot of these guys were like, they were depressed because they couldn't work. These are men who are the breadwinners of their family, who always worked and supported their kids, their wives, and then you take that from them. And then they're seeing their country being burned to the ground. And they're concerned about things like mandatory vaccinations, forced vaccinations, contact tracing. There was a lot of stuff that they were worried about. I mean, some of these guys were talking about, what if the UN comes in and like, because of the civil unrest, and then says, well, we're going to, impose some kind of weird order. There were a lot of concerns.
They have every right to be worried about those things, because we saw how much government was willing to do. So,
these guys were right.
Everything we stood up for here in the state of Michigan, we've been proven to be, and you said about 99.9% certainty, we were 100% right on everything.
Yes.
On everything that we stood up for has been proven, in fact, to be true.
And the Michigan Supreme Court sided with them that the lockdowns were unconstitutional.
Correct.
So they were right about that too. The things that they were saying at that time. So this is the first time Adam and Barry meet in person. And from what I understand, they kind of just meet in passing. Like Adam's coming at a different time, Barry's leaving. Maybe, they interact briefly, essentially. And again, this whole thing, the FBI commandeers the hotel. They have another mobile command unit. They're acting like this is a meeting of the 5 families of the mafia. It's just the stupidity. You couldn't make it up if you wanted to. But also, like, some of these guys brought their kids to these events. So Jeremy Dieter, he was the Ohio target, one of them. He brought his daughter to this meeting and this event because, there's a swimming pool there, and they think this is just a normal militia meeting, which we often have. And Robeson gets in the swimming pool with his daughter. He puts his arm around her. This is a pedophile, which, of course, these guys don't know at the time because the FBI is keeping that off of his criminal record, so that because they know these militia groups sometimes vet people, right? They'll run a background check on them. They'll look to see if they have criminal convictions. So they don't know. And the FBI is just allowing this freak around people's kids. It is disgusting. So this is June of 2020. Now we move forward to July of 2020. What is happening? Literally nothing. The Wolverine Watchmen hardly exists without Dan Chappell. Joe's working. He's having marital problems, what have you. He's not really involved. They put on, the government, what they call a joint training exercise. So prior to July, the Wolverine Watchmen were training in Munich, Michigan, just local FTXs of local people. But again, the FBI wants this to be we got to make this a multi-state plot. So let's put on a joint training exercise in Wisconsin, and we'll bring the guys from Michigan. We'll invite guys from Indiana, from Tennessee, from Ohio, from, all across the country. They wanted to bring these people together. And this was it's called the Cambria FTX. This was July 11 through 12 weekend of 2020. This was put on by Steve Robeson, the FBI informant, at his friend's property. And this was billed as a family-friendly event. There's Facebook messages of Robeson advertising this, saying, you know, there's going to be a little girl's birthday party, bring the family. We're going to have a family friendly event we're going to barbecue. There's going to be music. There's a swimming pool. And then also there's going to be a joint training exercise of, you know, bringing these various militia folks together and doing a training. So this is, again, it's all set up by the FBI. And by this point, an undercover FBI agent has already been inserted into the group. So this is a gentleman, I'm going to call him out, is Special Agent Mark Schwiers, posing as a man named Mark Woods. He had made contact with Adam online on Facebook through his girlfriend, Amanda Keller, Adam's girlfriend, Amanda Keller. She met somebody named Elise Marie, which turned out to be an FBI OCE, online covert employee. So the FBI has agents who operate false personas online. They might run a militia page, a Pro2A Facebook page. They pretend to be maybe a part of a militia group or just interested. And so she introduces her boyfriend, Mark Woods, to Adam. You could not make this up if you wanted to. He is sending Adam pictures of Meno Island. So, you know, there's a governor's residence there.
You keep going.
Yeah, there's a governor's residence there in Mackinac Island. And the FBI actually went up to this area, and you'll see the pictures in the documentary. They take pictures of literally the locks on the door. It's a private property. So it's like, what is going on here? And then they send it to Adam on Facebook. They even took a Google map and they drew these like lines on it. They sent that to Adam. And so this is just to have it in your mind as you're thinking, okay, so that happens in June. Now we're into July. There's this joint training exercise in Wisconsin put on by the FBI, and a shoot house is constructed. Now it comes out at trial that the materials were purchased by the FBI through their informant to construct the shoot house, and Special Agent Mark Schwiers testified he helped construct the shoot house. So remember, these guys were smeared as that this shoot house was put together to somehow practice like taking out Whitmer or her security detail. Well, no, it was manufactured by the FBI, constructed by the FBI and their informants, and then they had friendly and non-friendly targets in it, and they were basically teaching people how to clear rooms. And again, what they were told they were doing was, hey, in the event that there's riots in your town and law enforcement doesn't show up and they start going into people's homes, you need to know how to clear a room. You need to know how to protect, yourself, your family. So it's CQB is what they call it. I think close quarters, something or other, but that's what they're training them for. And it's the FBI who is training them.
Sounds like a weekend that I would be involved in.
Right. It's
training.
Right? But if you're practicing, though, like they claimed it was modeled after her vacation car. That's not true. These were like hastily constructed with plywood. And why would you have friendly and non-friendly targets if you're going to just kill everybody and kidnap somebody? It makes no sense. So that happens that weekend. They're doing tactics of getting out of cars with your guns. We've got videos from the event. They had Barry doing barrel training. And so the video that's played at trial to make it look like these guys were doing something bad is actually just, this is an innocuous event. There is a little girl's birthday party there. So people brought their kids to this event. It was not how it was portrayed. And I've interviewed many people who attended this event but weren't charged with anything. And they told me, like, I never heard anything about a governor, never heard Whitmer's name mentioned. It just seemed like a regular training, thing. There was food, there was a cookout, there was music playing, there was a medical tent, there's all these different things going on. And yes, of course, you're having conversations. And, at one of these events, Barry tried to, blow up like it was a firework. He taped pennies onto it. and he exploded it. Okay, whatever. This is not an IED. It's not a WMD. And I think the guys also blew up a stove. This is just like, guys, this is dudes doing things. And Dan Harris was a Marine. He had a little bit of experience with explosives, but nobody's really trying to do anything outrageous or outlandish. So that's the middle of June of 2020. We'll move it forward. I'm going to try to wrap this up as brief as I can, or to speed it up, because I know we're running short on time. That is the summer of 2020. That is still not enough. And Joe Morrison couldn't go to that one. I don't think Pete Musico was there. So there's still people that they didn't get enough video of them running around with guns looking scary, or they didn't get enough audio of them talking crap about politicians. So we need something more, they're saying. And
I guarantee you, if you mic'd up Michigan during this time at parties and get-togethers and gun ranges,
you would have heard way worse.
Would be in prison right now.
Exactly. Yes, and I should also add that at these meetings and at these events, they're also, like, the informants are asking them hypotheticals, like, hypothetically speaking, when would it be okay to use violence? And then they take the response, play it out of context at court, and try to make these guys sound like they were violent or whatever. And it's so wrong.
And to let people know, look, when you have a tyrannical government, it's your duty as an American citizen to stand up against that.
Yeah, well, they had these memes where they talked about, like, the tree of liberty has to be watered with the blood of tyrants. Yeah. This is classic American rhetoric and American revolutionary spirit and history. It's a meme too, but these memes, they're all in the court documents. These guys are being charged with, like, thought crimes, essentially, is what it comes down to. Or because they posted these memes, that somehow means they were going to do something or wanted to do something, which I think is ridiculous. So let's move forward to the end of August. The FBI, Jason Chambers really wanted there to be some kind of, like, we need something concrete. There's no plan. Nobody's talking about kidnapping governors. They're just engaging in, like, incendiary talk about, tyrants should hang and whatever. Okay. So Chambers really wanted to do a recon of Whitmer's vacation cottage. And so this is where, the FBI planned this well in advance of the guys ever knowing that this was going to happen. They had no idea, in fact. So first of all, Gretchen Whitmer picks the date and time of the recon on her vacation cottage in coordination with the FBI. She has the FBI come to her house and install pull cams in advance so that when they drive them by, they can capture them on recording. So, like, at no point is she in any danger. She is well aware. She's more aware of what's going to happen than the actual guys themselves, which is hilarious because she still pretends that she was a victim. And so
she pretends like she didn't know what was happening. She could be kidnapped at any time and I was going to be on trial and hung in another state.
Yeah.
I mean, that was her whole play on this thing.
Yeah, exactly. But she picks the date and time, which is August 29 of 2020, the FBI's first recon, which they called the daytime recon. Now, we've got text messages of the FBI agents and informants talking, and the FBI saying, we want Dan Harris there. We want Brandon Cassera there. Try to get this person. They try to get Ty Garba and Caleb Franks. And none of them could even go. They're like working, or they're busy with their family, or they just don't have money to do this stuff, which was with a lot of this. The FBI had to pay for their gas or pick them up, buy them food, lure them out with, like, oh, we're going to go to Buffalo Wild Wings and we'll pay for it. It's so stupid. So the only person they could get to go on this daytime recon is Adam Fox and Eric Molitor. Now, Eric is not part of any militia group. I should add, Adam Fox was not a member of the Wolverine Watchmen. He was told that he was going to be the head of the Michigan chapter of a fake national militia group created by the FBI called the United States Patriot 3 Percenters. They had Steve Robeson, who initially said he was the head of the Wisconsin chapter. Around the summer of 2020, he told them that he became the national commander. So he tells Adam, we're going to make you the head of the Michigan chapter. Again, this does not exist outside of like the FBI. This is their thing. They even make him a business card with a logo, and then they'll seize that later and use it as evidence against him. So Adam is the head of the Michigan chapter of a fake 3%er group, and the only person he was able to recruit into it, because they told him he needed to recruit people, was his girlfriend Amanda Keller, Dan Chappell, the FBI informant, undercover FBI agent Mark Schwiers, and then his friend Sean Fix, who was pretending to be a Navy SEAL at the time. So this is the silliest thing you can imagine. So Adam is the only person they get to go. And then Eric is from Cadillac. He's not from Grand Rapids. He's not from Jackson County like the Watchmen. He's not part of their group. He has his own group called the Cadillac Crew, and they would just go out to protect businesses. And Eric and Adam had worked security before. Adam actually worked security for a U.S. Marshal. That never got talked about. And so they say to Eric, Adam messages him and says, hey, do you want to check out a high-profile vacation cottage? Nothing about Whitmer, nothing about surveillance, nothing about we're going to case the governor's house to plot a kidnapping. Eric is thinking, because up until that point, they'd been tracking Antifa and BLM rioters that were coming in from out of town. They were staying at hotels. So he's thinking, oh, they're adapting their tactics. They must not be staying at hotels now. They're probably staying at Airbnbs. So he's thinking this is a security thing. And we even have the messages where he's like, oh, I wish I was getting paid for this gig. And so Dan Chappell's driving the vehicle. He picks up Adam. Adam's in the passenger seat. They stop at Eric's house. They pick him up. And Eric has no idea where they're going. Of course, they all smoke weed beforehand. Eric shows them this little RF scanner that he got because he's trying to impress clients for security work. It was some cheap $50 thing you can order on Amazon. Okay, but the FBI was real scared about it. So he is in the back seat. Dan Chappell's armed. Adam Fox is armed. And Eric is just in this vehicle. Well, on the way up, they're going up to where her vacation cottage is. It's up by Elk Rapids. Yeah. They're on their way up there, and about halfway through, Adam and Dan start talking. And Adam is very childlike and naive. In his mind, like, none of this is real, because Dan Chappell told him, when I was in the military, we had to train guys for specific missions to get them focused. You know, we need to do that now, but it's not real. So Adam's like, oh, okay. So they're like giggling, and they're like, we're about to go up to this bitch's, vacation house. We're going to, check it out. And that's the first time Eric hears this. He's already in the vehicle. The people in front of him are armed. He doesn't know them that well. He's never met Dan before. He only knows Adam very briefly from work they've done together. So he doesn't know, like, if he tries to back out, are they going to kill him? Like, what's going to happen? So, and he also doesn't know how serious this is. It's like one of those weird, you don't know what you do in the moment. So they ask him, look up her address on your phone. This is where they get the Google search. Oh, Eric wanted to look this up. Well, no, he was asked to do it by two men who are armed in the vehicle. So anyways, they do that. Dan Chappell drives them up, and you see part of it in the trailer. You can see Dan's face as they drive by. It's that blue house on Timberlake Drive. This is all public record, by the way, so I can say this. And I should add, too, that I went and reenacted the route. I drove by her vacation cottage. Ooh, it's not illegal. It's not private property. You can literally just drive down the street. And that's not illegal. So they drove by, and Dan Chappell instructs Adam to take video on his phone as they go by. And that's the video that you see in the trailer, is that what Adam took. But of course, they're going to use this as evidence against him later. And it's so wrong. It's so illegal to do this, to ask somebody to do something that is something that they didn't come up with on their own, that you're going to use as evidence later, just like giving him the business cards, telling him he's part of he's running a Michigan chapter of a fake militia group, telling him to recruit people. all these things are all the government doing it. And Adam is living in the basement of a vacuum repair shop at this time. This is not a man of great means to pull off something like this. So since they only got 3 people to do the daytime recon, oh, and I should add, they stop at a tavern, and the FBI had agents in the bushes. They had them inside in plain clothes, taking pictures and from the booth next to them. Dan Chappell hands Adam a pen and paper and says, draw a map of where we just went. And Adam's like, I don't really know how to do that. And he's, oh, just do your best. So Adam draws it, gives it back to Dan. And then the FBI says, oh, look, he drew this map because he was planning something. And they take pictures of him in the restaurant as he's drawing it, because that's how fucking close they are. Excuse me. Sorry. I just get so angry about this because it's so
ruining people's lives.
It's so evil, and it's so ridiculous that this was a real threat, as the agents are right there monitoring, directing the entire thing like they're choreographing a movie. So they weren't happy with that, though, because they only got 2 people duped into going there. And again, Eric had no idea where they were going until they were almost there. And at his trial, the FBI got caught splicing the audio from the drive back, pretending that was what was said on the way there to make it look like Eric knew in advance where they were going. This is the kind of thing that they do. That trial wasn't shut down. No one was reprimanded for that. They said, oh, it was a typo, or we made a mistake. No, you spliced audio. That isn't a typo. Somebody had to grab the audio from 4 hours later and splice it and pretend that this was said on the way there. It's fabricating evidence on the stand. It should have, none of this should ever have happened. So that wasn't enough. They say, we need more. We need to do another recon. You need to be able to maximize attendance to this one. So what do? Let's do another FTX. This one put on at Ty Garbin's grandfather's property in Luther, Michigan. This was the weekend of September, I want to say 12 and 13 of 2020. And so this is just a regular FTX. And that night they have a group, they get the group of guys, all the people they want to incriminate in it. So Barry, Adam, the Null brothers, a gentleman named Brian Higgins from Wisconsin, who was not in militias. He just knew Steve Robeson, and Steve brought him there. And Steve also was running a fake charity. He was telling people stories that he was going after child traffickers and working with law enforcement, that he'd gone to Mexico to rescue kids who were trafficked. Ironic that he's a child predator. And so that's, what Higgins was told the night that they went to the nighttime recon. Higgins is told they're going to hunt pedophiles, like they're tracking a pedo or a trafficker. And that made sense to him because of the stories Robeson had told him. Barry was told they were going to do land navigation training. The FBI also took the opportunity to introduce an undercover FBI agent, another one, this one going by the name Red, posing as an explosives expert. His real name, by the way, is Timothy Bates. I have to name and shame these people because they should be ashamed of themselves. And the FBI made a video. They recorded a video of them blowing up an SUV. And so he took this video and they called a Circle of Trust meeting, and he played the video and was basically like, oh, I can get explosives. If you want explosives, I'm your guy. And Adam was very excited by this. He thought it was super cool. Barry, they said, was visibly excited, although he doesn't say anything. Nobody says, I want to buy explosives. Nobody gives him money at this point. So this is just the FBI choosing to do this. So that night they do the nighttime recon. People were told different things to get into the vehicles. Nobody is told we're going to go surveil the governor's vacation cottage. And so 3 vehicles, and I should add, all driven by either an FBI informant or an undercover agent. This is like, it's so stupid. they drive them up, and we have text messages of the FBI agents saying to the informants, drive them up, this way. We've got really good low light ambience. Because they're trying to pick them up on the pole cams that they put in her property in advance. They want to get them on video. And so it's just a ridiculous thing. Half of these guys don't even know what they're doing or how this is land navigation training. But the FBI provides them with DeWalt radios. And one of them got night vision goggles that, of course, the Fed encouraged them to buy. And they're like, you go on the other side of the lake and flash your light, and we'll see if we can see it. They claim Adam is coordinating all of this on these radios. Well, every single informant or agent was recording this entire thing. Where's the audio of Adam directing this? It was never played because it doesn't exist. That didn't happen. And again, the FBI is doing all of this. They're furnishing all of the materials. They're driving the vehicles. It's all their idea. And then they're literally saying to each other, drive them up this way so we can pick them up on the cameras here. And of course, they couldn't even pull that off. So at their trial, they introduced a video that was a reenactment of what it would have looked like because the poll cams didn't pick anything up. That's how stupid the entire thing was. And that's how not close enough that they got to the cottage for a surveillance that really didn't happen. In furtherance of what? Like these guys.
2 convictions.
I know. Well, because a lot of this stuff was not able to be presented to the jury. They really controlled what evidence could be presented. And then they played a lot of clips of the guys, drunk and stoned, just saying, incendiary things. Then they show video of them with guns looking scary. And you have some people in Michigan who they see a gun and they're like, they must have been doing something. Or, a lot of people still trust the government. They trust the FBI. So they think, well, the FBI wouldn't have gotten involved unless they had done something. They must be guilty of something. That's kind of the mentality, I think, for a lot of this. And so that is the middle of September. Robeson was planning another FTX for October, but that never didn't happen. And so I think what ended up happening is that they just realized, we got to wrap this thing up. We did the nighttime recon. We want to arrest these guys right before the election to maximize the political impact, to help sway the election in a key swing state, to help revive Whitmer's failing political career at that time, because everybody was angry at her for the lockdowns. She killed thousands of people, putting COVID patients into nursing homes. That was a big thing. And they needed to, let's make her a victim. And so, they
at it.
In October of 2020, early October 7, the FBI conducts nationwide raids and arrests. And I want to make it clear, it was nationwide. There were people in Wisconsin that were raided, people in various states, and a lot of these people were not charged with anything. So there were people that were arrested. Some of the guys were led to this place in Ypsilanti where they were told they were going to meet up with Red to get free gear. Oh, he's got surplus gear. You can get some extra plate carriers and magazines. And again, these guys not having a lot of money, they're like, oh shit, free gear, I'm there. And really they were being led to the takedown, which is just crazy. And then other people had their homes assaulted at the same time. These raids were done. Guns were pointed at children. There were almost 200 people at Joe Morrison and Pete Musico's house when they conducted that raid. They almost blew up an entire city block because they took an MRAP and they drove through Joe's truck, pushed it into Pete's truck, and it got this close to hitting this big propane tank. This is how stupid the FBI is. They knocked out a window, which still hasn't been replaced. It's covered with plywood even now because these families don't have the money to fix what happened to their homes that were destroyed in these insane raids. And so this is really essentially what happened.
I mean, it's a horrible novel. I mean, everything that you just said, it's very scary. And if you analyze that whole operation that they did nationwide, like you said, right?
Yep.
The logistics, the money, the manpower, the oversight that needs to happen to even pull something like this off, right? Then you fast forward 2 months and they did the exact same thing in January 6th. That's how big and involved and entrenched the FBI is in our lives. It's not right. It's scary.
It's terrifying. And I want to add too that like they had a guy here in my state in Virginia that they were trying to get to make a quick reaction force. Their informant told him he needed to build an army in Northern Virginia. The informant offered the use of an explosives laden drone to be flown into the North Carolina vacation cottage of Ralph Northam, who was the governor of my state at the time. They were trying to get this guy to, do some plot to get him. They also tried to get this, and this is a disabled elderly Vietnam veteran. They were trying to get him to make homemade explosives. It's just crazy. So like I say, it was nationwide. They had targets across multiple states. They did raids in multiple states. Frank Butler, that's the gentleman from Virginia that they were trying to get Ralph Northam. They raided his home. It terrorized his elderly wife, took a bunch of his stuff, never charged him. Wow. And there's many people like that. And then they were threatened and told, if you testify, you're going to go to jail. 10 years minimum.
See that, and that's what you hit on the very beginning, which I interviewed a former Green Beret who never went inside the Capitol on January 6th, Jeremy Brown, one of the last people to be let out. He was talking about all this, about what they'll do is they want you to settle. They scare the hell out of you to settle so nothing gets brought up in court. And they told him time and time again, like, hey, all you have to admit is a misdemeanor charge and it's time served and you're out. He's like, I'm going to rot in here to force you to go to trial so I can expose you. And unfortunately, he never got the trial. He got pardoned. Now he's out. I'm going to bring Jeremy on again. But that's what they do is they scare the hell out of these people. And these people, like you said, they don't have a lot of money. They have to provide for their family. They're usually the only breadwinners, right? And so when they say, hey, look, pal, you have 3 kids. You're going to go away for 10 years unless you settle on this little misdemeanor or inform on somebody else. And then we're going to give you like 30 days or 60 days, or we're going to give you probation. And what right-minded America wouldn't say yes to that? They're going to be like, holy cow, I don't want to go to prison. I can't. So that's how they do it. It's so wrong.
It's evil, honestly. And there needs to be accountability for this. Somebody needs to be, I want all of these agents fired. Why are they still in the FBI today? Why hasn't there been a proper investigation into the misconduct that took place in this case? Why do we still have 5 men in prison? For what? Because you manufactured something and then brought people together and just recorded them for almost an entire year. And that's the sick thing about it, is they just destroyed so many lives. The children have been affected, the loss of their fathers. Children need their fathers. It's really important. And the true nature of it has never really been told, didn't come out at court, isn't in the transcripts, isn't in the discovery. You don't get the full story until you have somebody like me who actually takes the time to travel across 9 different states to interview people and actually get their stories of the people who were scared. And I have people who are still scared to even be on camera talking about what happened. They still think that the shoe could drop at any minute because of what happened to them.
So were you excited when President Trump mentioned, I think a week or so ago, that he was looking into this to possibly?
Yes. Yes. I have been fighting for that for years, trying to, get a hold of anybody. Weaponization Committee. And I want to say that the Weaponization Committee did nothing. Jim Jordan did not ever reach out to any of these families. We had victims, targets from Ohio, from his state, that he should have taken the time to meet with. And it just never happened. And so when I heard Ed Martin was going to be looking into this, the president's pardon lawyer, he's also in charge of the president's working group on weaponization, which I think is going to be far more powerful than the Weaponization Committee that was sold to us as like a church committee style hearing, and really nothing of substance came from it. I am, very happy, but I want more than that, because pardoning these guys isn't enough. First of all, they didn't do anything wrong. They didn't commit any crimes. None of these people were violent. The only person that was violent was Special Agent Richard Trask, who beat his wife after attending a swingers party in Kalamazoo. He strangled her. He almost killed her. He spends one night in jail. By the way, when they went to meet him to arrest him because he fled the scene intoxicated in a vehicle in his underpants, he was not charged with a DUI. He's very clearly intoxicated in the body cam footage. You can see it. This is the FBI privilege. Oh, a night in jail. You pay a little $900 fine. You're good to go. Why is he not in prison?
Where's this Dan Chappell guy at now?
Good question. Yeah, I believe Dan Chappell was relocated. In fact, the FBI actually made up the difference on the sale of his home to relocate him. No one knows where Steve Robeson is either. His home burned down, meaning he burned his own house down to get insurance money. Who knows where he is? But all of these people who participated, all of the informants who orchestrated this, should be brought to DC, made to testify under oath to answer questions about what they did and why they did it. Same with the agents who orchestrated and oversaw the entire thing. It's outrageous. I think there's no better example than weaponization than this. Also, January 6th wouldn't have happened had they not gotten away with this first. This was really the dry run. What they did at the Lansing Capitol with the fake storming of the Capitol, yeah, that was the dry run for January 6th. That was overseen, by the way, by a man named Stephen D'Antuono, who was the head of the Detroit field office at the time, who 1 week after these men were arrested, they were arrested October 7. On October 13th, he's promoted by Christopher Wray to be the assistant director of the Washington, D.C. field office, so he can oversee another storming of the Capitol on January 6th.
Wow. Unbelievable. And just to reiterate, you are finishing your documentary and you need funds for that to happen, right?
Yes.
Very expensive to do, I heard, right?
Yes. I've got to go back to Michigan for my final trip. I need to spend about a week there shooting more B-roll, following up interviews with the guys. I actually lost a drone. I was getting drone footage and I was trying to get it over by her lake house, her vacation cottage. And they must have some kind of electronic barrier up because the drone was working fine until we were flying it over the lake and it got close and it just stopped dead air and dropped right into the water. We've never seen anything like that happen. And there were people out on a boat. They even came over to look for it to try to recover it for us. They couldn't find it. So there's, several $1,000s just gone.
Government took your drone.
It happens, what
in the
are you
description, folks, there is a website where you can go. It's called kandkfilm.com. Go there, help her out any way that you can. As we say, when I was running for governor, Christina, buy me a cup of coffee, right? $5. If you get 100,000 people donating $5, it adds up quick.
Yeah,
okay?
Exactly.
So, if you want to watch this documentary as much as I want to watch this documentary, I will be donating to you after this live to help get this thing done, because the men and women who unfortunately were involved in this, who were entrapped by our own FBI, whose lives were ruined, they deserve justice. And all of us in the state of Michigan who went through this and everything else was going on with the pandemic and the January 6ers, everything else, they deserve accountability. They truly do. And that's why I think we're so frustrated. And I'm hoping Kash Patel and Don Bongino can change the FBI and clean house and do what's right and, just get a lot of answers to all of us, because I think the people deserve to know.
Yeah, I agree.
Christina, thank you so much for your hard work, your investigation. The amount of hours that you must have put into this is probably just astronomical. I can't even imagine. You obviously know this case inside and out. The comments, everybody's just amazed on the wisdom that you have throughout this whole thing. I am blown away. Thank you so much for coming on today and sharing the story.
Thank you. I'm glad I got to tell it because I think it's so important. And, you know, really, we're in 2025 now. These guys have kind of been forgotten about as J6 took more of a precedent. Well, and I can understand why that would be a higher precedent for people because there were over 1,500 people who were victimized in that. And those guys needed to be, men and women, excuse me, needed to be pardoned and freed. But there needs to be, these men can't be forgotten. The president can only pardon Adam and Barry because they were the ones charged federally, but we still have Joe Morrison, Pete Musico, Paul Beller in state prisons in Michigan, and they need help. Something needs to be done to help them. I know he can't pardon them, but there needs to be an acknowledgement from the FBI and the DOJ that they lied, that they manufactured this hoax, and there needs to be some kind of, you know, removing the charges against those men, because how can they be charged with providing material support for something that is acknowledged didn't really happen and only happened as far as the FBI made it happen? Those men need help. They need relief. The only person who could pardon them, ironically enough, is Whitmer. And I don't think that's going to happen. And I don't think that's going to happen. So,
and you know what? I interview all the candidates that are running for governor. The only one that hasn't come on my show yet is John James. But I will ask all those candidates this question: would you be willing to look at the investigation if shenanigans was done? Pardon those folks. I think that's a fair question.
Yes, and I will say right here, right now, I will assist any investigator, whether it is the state of Michigan running an investigation or any kind of Republican committee there. I will produce documents. I will testify. I will bring other people to testify, you know, with certain assurances that they're not going to face charges for doing so and be threatened as they were last time. This needs to be fully exposed. The people of Michigan deserve the truth about what actually happened in this case, which they didn't get at these show trials. And the American people deserve to know the truth about what preceded January 6th. What was the FBI doing prior to that? Why were they creating fake militia groups? Why did they have informants posing as head of state chapters of various militia groups? Why were they in groups that they claimed were then extreme on January 6th? It's ridiculous. And I also don't believe that there was only 26 informants present on January 6th. I think the number is actually far greater. And there needs to be some kind of reckoning for the FBI, some kind of audit of their confidential human source, CHS informant program that they spend millions of dollars on. These informants are paid in envelopes of cash. And many times they're using criminals. They're using people who are liars. And it's wrong. It's disgusting. And something has to be done. And I'm hoping that maybe with Kash Patel and Dan Bongino in there, we will get some answers as to that.
Awesome. Wow. Well, just like I said, I'm going to do my part and expose this to as many people as I can. You know, like I said, we have several 100,000 people that follow me on all my platforms. I'm going to send this out to my email list, my contact at Tucker Carlson, Sean Ryan, everyone that I know that could help you get the story out, because just like you said, it needs to be told.
It does. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
You are most welcome. It was our honor. Whoop, there we go. It was our honor. Have a great day.
Have a good one. Thank you.
Wow, man, that was more than I expected. I did not know. I mean, she was as a wealth of knowledge. Obviously, she has been investigating this thing inside and out. And so, please, somebody just commented, you know, what is the email address? It's in the description, but it's www.knkfilm.com. knkfilm.com. You can follow Christina on X at Radix Verum. I'll be tagging her in all the videos that I do. I'll be sending this to my contacts, to Tucker Carlson and Sean Ryan, and hopefully getting her some airtime, because I think those people need to be let out immediately if there were shenanigans like she described. Unbelievable that we're even having these conversations. And I think that's what scares the hell out of all of us, is the weaponization of our government, our judicial system, and everything else against the people, which should never, ever happen in America. Because if you don't stand up now, you may not have anything to stand up for here in the future, because they may come after you. God bless you. God bless the state of Michigan, of course, and always God bless these United States. Till next time.